Listen, I finally have the heir I've always wanted, so I'm divorcing you. My husband happily reported this to me. Heir. Normally, when one speaks of a man's heir, it should mean a son born to his wife. However, I am not pregnant. Moreover, after giving birth to my eldest daughter, I've felt pressured for a long time because we haven't been able to have a boy. So my husband has an heir. This must mean that another woman gave birth to his son. In fact, he brought home a woman in her early 20s and a baby boy, just a few months old. I was so shocked by the sudden situation that I was left dumbfounded. This is for the good of the company too, you understand, right? My mother is also happy that we finally have an heir. Take your useless daughter and leave. The pressure from my mother-in-law and my husband to have a boy has been there since the beginning of our marriage, and because I couldn't have one, my husband ended up having an affair and got the baby boy he always wanted. I can still bear the mistreatment towards me, but my daughter is undoubtedly my husband's child. Despite this, I couldn't possibly forgive my husband trying to throw us both out. Just as I was about to express my anger, my daughter, who had been quietly observing the situation, said something astonishing. Everyone present, including myself, was stunned by my daughter's statement. Following her revelation, my husband and his mistress would plummet to rock bottom. I am a 40-something housewife that works part-time. I work part-time at a supermarket while also taking care of the housework. My husband, Scott, is also in his 40s and serves as the executive vice president of a small family-owned printing company. The company is managed by Scott's brother, the third generation to run it. The founder was my mother-in-law's father, and Scott's and his brother's father was the son-in-law who took over the business. As a result, my mother-in-law has a strong sense of family lineage and has always been particularly hostile towards me, making my daily life difficult. When a distant relative who managed the accounts fell ill and had to take a sudden 2-week leave, I offered to help temporarily because I had accounting experience from before I was married, but they wouldn't allow me, a non-family member, to be involved in the family business. Honestly, I don't know how far the term family extends. I might not consider it family because I'm married into it. Moreover, my mother-in-law also showed extreme favoritism towards her son. She adored Scott to an extreme, and even though she was opposed when his brother was set to take over the company, it was actually their father who was managing everything. After observing how his sons conducted business and their relationships with clients, he finally convinced my mother-in-law to let the older brother inherit the role. Scott's brother married in his late 20s and lived with their family due to being the heir, but they struggled to have children. The pressure from my mother-in-law was intense, and his wife was constantly berated and insulted for being infertile. In her late 40s, my sister-in-law finally saw my mother-in-law give up on the idea of grandchildren, but she continued to face harassment for not having children. Scott's brother would admonish his mother from time to time, but she was stubborn and refused to change her attitude. Scott and I, who got married around the same time as his brother, were in our early 20s, but it wasn't until our late 20s that we had our daughter Angela. We had been pressured to have children ever since our marriage, and there were times I thought I might have a nervous breakdown. When I found out I was pregnant, I was incredibly happy. However, once the pregnancy was confirmed, the next question was always, when will we know the sex? They only wanted a boy. I can still remember the disappointed looks on my mother-in-law's and Scott's faces when they found out the baby was a girl. My mother-in-law, despite being told repeatedly that the baby was a girl, prepared boys' clothing and even tried to choose a boy's name on her own. I gradually began to feel like a failure for not being able to have a boy, and I unfairly blamed my unborn daughter for not coming as a boy. But that ended the day I first felt her move. The moment I felt her presence inside me, I knew I had to protect her no matter what, and I resolved to be a mother. The harassment from my mother-in-law continued, and Scott didn't even come to the hospital on the day of the birth. I gave birth to Angela alone. When my mother-in-law saw my daughter for the first time after I was discharged, her only comment was, "Make sure the next one is a boy." Life became even more difficult after Angela was born. Between caring for a newborn and managing the household, I had nearly sleepless nights. Scott, of course, didn't help at all. In fact, just over a month after the birth, he was already pressuring me for a boy. I was too exhausted from child rearing to have the energy, and when I refused, he became sullen and troublesome. As Angela grew, we were still unable to conceive again, and Scott gradually became more distant. Now that Angela is in high school, Scott and I barely talk. Scott and my mother-in-law never participated in any of Angela's celebrations or ceremonies. Scott would forget his own daughter's birthday, go out drinking, and come home completely wasted. It was heartbreaking to see young Angela waiting for hours for her father, surrounded by cake and lavish meals. Further, growing up, hearing things like girls are useless and money spent on girls is a waste from Scott and my mother-in-law, it's no wonder she never grew fond of them. Now, Scott is just a roommate to us. Meanwhile, as my brother-in-law and his wife had no hope of conceiving, my mother-in-law began pressuring me in my early 40s to have a boy. It was already a difficult proposition due to my age, but the marital relationship was so broken that having more children wasn't even an option. Moreover, I couldn't bear the thought of possibly having another girl and facing the same issues with Scott. I just wanted her to give up. After years of being told the same thing, I was fed up. Just when Scott's company, where he serves as executive vice president, started to struggle financially and his salary was significantly cut. As an executive, he faced a higher rate of pay cut than regular employees. The trouble started when a major client terminated their contract, apparently because of a dispute. Scott blamed his incompetent brother, the president, for his hardships, saying he was always the one who had to cover for him. Even in a company crisis, he seemed unfazed. Losing a major client could be a crisis-level problem for a small printing company, but he seemed to lack any sense of urgency. With our household income decreasing, I wanted to help out as much as I could, so I talked to Scott about working full-time. I had already been offered a chance to go from part-time to full-time at my current job, which seemed perfect. However, Scott was vehemently opposed. He mentioned various reasons like me possibly neglecting household duties and him losing face as a husband, but essentially his attitude seemed to be that women should just quietly obey men, but at this rate would barely be able to pay rent and utility bills, let alone afford groceries, and I wouldn't be able to give Angel any allowance or cover her commuting costs to school. Thinking about it, maybe his pride was hurt, but Scott turned red and said, "It's a waste of money to give her any allowance anyway, so no allowance until my salary is back, and she can walk or bike to school." Angela, seeing that biking was not feasible, bravely started working at a cafe to earn her share. I was proud of my resilient daughter, but could only feel irritation towards the prideful Scott. I couldn't act openly due to Scott's opposition, but I managed to increase our income by finding some work I could do from home after explaining the situation. Amidst these difficult times, Scott suddenly brought home a flashy woman in her late 20s and a baby boy just a few months old. The woman's name was Nicole, and the baby was Scott and Nicole's child. They had met through a business contact, and they had been having an affair for a year and a half. This affair had started around the time the company's performance began to decline, a time when Scott should have been attentive but was instead infatuated with Nicole. Although his salary had significantly decreased, it turned out he was only bringing home enough money for rent and utilities. The rest he spent on dates and gifts for Nicole. Despite our daughter struggling and working part-time, he is truly a hopeless man. We were utterly dismayed. To be honest, even knowing of his betrayal, I couldn't cry. Now that I have an heir, I'm going to remarry Nicole. I'm divorcing you, so take your useless daughter and get lost. This is also for the company. My mother is happy about having a grandson too. Scott said this with a triumphant look, throwing the words at Angela and me. Nicole is the daughter of a major corporation CEO, and marrying her would bring financial support to the company. Also, Nicole has two brothers who each have sons, so there is no need for her to take over a company, allowing her to just enjoy the wealth. My mother-in-law is pleased with this wealthy marital prospect and is urging them to remarry soon. Depending on financial support from Nicole's family, there are plans to replace Scott as president with Nicole's brother. Furthermore, they said it's time for me, who couldn't bear a son, and my daughter to step aside. I'm really sorry about this, but since it's a boy and your mother-in-law agrees, please understand. Scott and Nicole laughed down at us and ordered us to leave the house quickly. In any case, I couldn't continue with him, so divorce or whatever was fine, but it was frustrating to think why we had to be treated this way, and I bit my lip. I felt sorry for Angela to have such a father. Then Angela, who had been silent watching the situation, spoke up. I might not be one to say this, but I think you should reconsider remarrying her. Well, it's fine if you really think she's the one. Angela started to say something but stopped. It wasn't just simple opposition to the remarriage. She said it differently, but Scott, oblivious, flew into rage at her comment. What? What are you being so cheeky about? Angela quietly met Scott's gaze, sighed, and began to speak. That woman, she's always hanging all over a college guy at my part-time job, and it's the talk among the employees. It turns out Angela knew Nicole from before. Nicole was a regular at the cafe where Angela worked and often came in acting like lovers with a college student. Apparently Nicole is quite arrogant to the cafe staff, never looking them in the face when ordering, so she probably didn't recognize Angela. Scott seemed quite shaken by Angela's words. That must be some relative she's tutoring, right? To put it nicely, Nicole doesn't look like someone who could be tutoring a college student. It seemed a highly unlikely interpretation to me. Yes, that's right, he's a cousin, though he's a bit younger. Nicole, flustered, agreed with Scott. It seemed she was hiding something she didn't want to be known. Oh, a cousin? I see. Then you must surely know that this college student has a serious girlfriend, right? She's a classmate with long hair. Nicole's face clearly showed shock at this, and she began to lose her composure. What? A serious girlfriend? What are you talking about? Nicole snapped back, her words becoming disjointed. Scott stood by, turning pale. It was a terrible farce. Watching the scene, I couldn't stand it. Angela continued calmly. Cousin or whatever has been telling his friends that you're his sugar mommy. What? Don't be ridiculous. Don't spread lies. Nicole completely lost her composure, her language disarrayed. Seeing her bloodshot eyes, I worried she might harm Angela, but Angela remained composed. So, is that baby actually the college student's child? What? What do you mean? Isn't it my child? What are you talking about? It's Scott's child, of course. I was also surprised that Angela knew so much. The noisy Nicole suddenly became flustered and fell silent. Scott continued to be agitated. I decided to be as calm as Angela and pressed for an explanation. After a while, as if resigning herself, Nicole started to speak in bits and pieces. The child was likely the result of her relationship with the college student. She had been dating the college student, and when her father found out and scolded her, she pretended to break up with him. She met Scott around that time and used him as a camouflage boyfriend, planning to raise the college student's child as Scott's. Nicole liked younger men, and Scott was not really her type. She had just used him. She was serious with her younger boyfriend. Hearing that she was called a sugar mummy, Nicole was disheartened and became subdued. Then the baby in Scott's arms started crying. Can you resolve this issue on your own? I have no fond memories of being cherished by my father, so I agree with the divorce. I'll live with my mom. With that, Angela coldly pushed Scott away. Nicole was not in a state to discuss further, but as the baby started fussing, she was urged to go home, and they dispersed for the day. Nicole didn't soothe or care for the baby and cried all the way home. The baby is innocent, and seeing Nicole's inability to feel maternal made me sympathize with the baby. Scott had no choice but to leave the house and temporarily return to his parents' home. Later, Scott came home alone. Firstly, the child turned out not to be Scott's. After our discussion, a DNA test was conducted, and it showed that there was no parent-child relationship between Scott and the child. It is unclear whether the child is Nicole's and the college student's, but there is no doubt that Scott was merely used. Scott seems to have broken up with Nicole. Nicole really loved the college student and wanted to have and raise his child, but she decided to claim the child was Scott's due to her father's opposition and her belief that she should not ruin the future of a promising college student. The plan was to marry once and raise a child. After the college student became a working adult, Nicole intended to divorce Scott and remarry the college student. Moreover, their relationship had started while he was still in high school. They had been involved since he was a minor. One reason Nicole started a relationship with Scott was to camouflage the fact that she had been involved with a minor, fearing public exposure due to her status as the daughter of a major corporation CEO. Realizing Nicole had no affection for him at all, I felt a sense of pity as I listened to the story. On the other hand, the college student was only interested in the relationship for the money. He didn't care about Nicole's feelings and maintained the relationship only because it was financially beneficial. In reality, he didn't work part-time but enjoyed his student life with his true girlfriend, supported financially by Nicole. When confronted, the college student confessed easily. There's no way I could be serious about an old lady. I just hung out with her occasionally because she gave me support. It's a sugar relationship, just sugar mummy stuff. Despite the birth of the child, he eventually cut off all contact. After being abandoned by the college students, Nicole fell into despair and became apathetic, neglecting her child to the point of neglect. The house was in disarray. The child was constantly crying, and it seemed he wasn't even being fed properly. Concerned that the child might die, Nicole's eldest brother and his wife temporarily took the baby to care for him. Scott came to me, begging to try again, saying he wanted to start over because he had broken up with Nicole. Moreover, his mother was also saying that a young wife couldn't control her desires and was no good, urging me to have a son while I'm still in my early 40s. What convenient people they are. No, thank you. I'll be leaving this house immediately, so feel free to remarry or do whatever you like. I firmly refused. Please, what will happen to my life in the company? I was deceived. Scott pleaded for help, but he seemed to conveniently forget how he had treated me all this time. He's truly hopeless. I've been excluded by your mother for years because I'm not part of the family, and you recently called Angela and me useless, didn't you? I think it's better not to be with someone you consider useless. That's not true. I was deceived by Nicole, and now I realize family is the most important. It might be late, but let's try for a son again. You still talk about having a son even now? Do you really think you can be a family with Angela and me again after all this time? You never cared about us. Always only about yourself. Angela feels the same way. Scott began to cry in front of his daughter, repeating selfish remarks about what would become of his life. Angela was thoroughly disgusted. Dad, you're really creepy. Who cares about your life? Do you even understand what you've done? Are you going to abandon your father too? Grandma didn't mean any harm. She really likes you. Let's live together as a family. Sorry, but I can't think of you or Grandma as family anymore. From now on, we'll be cutting off our parent-child relationship. Take care of Grandma. Scott's tears only intensified in response to Angela's cold attitude. Though he initially resisted divorce, Scott's brother and his wife intervened, and the divorce was eventually finalized. I wasn't very familiar with the company's details, but it turned out that Scott, as the executive vice president, had angered an important client and caused losses to the company. Scott's arrogant behavior had been a problem several times before, and he had ruined several transactions. Scott's brother repeatedly warned him, but Scott's arrogant attitude persisted, leading to conflicts with clients whenever he visited them. Recently, he had been relegated to handling phone calls only, yet he even managed to upset a client over the phone. The client, having been lenient due to a long-standing relationship, finally reached their limit and terminated the contract. Oblivious, Scott was busy having an affair with Nicole during this critical time. For several months, his brother tried to mend the relationship with the client. After much effort, the client agreed to resume major transactions on the condition that Scott was fired. The client acknowledged the relentless efforts of Scott's brother and promised even more orders than before, now that Scott was no longer with the company. Without hesitation, Scott's brother fired him. Scott had boasted that he was the one covering for his incompetent brother, but in reality, it was his brother who had been busy covering for him. Scott would visit clients and then go to play slots or leave cigarette butts in the client's parking lot, exhibiting problematic behavior even during crises he had caused. His brother was exasperated and took the opportunity to fire him. Thanks to his brother's efforts, the company escaped bankruptcy, but Scott ended up unemployed. Having never really worked properly and having no skills, Scott struggled to find a job. His past work attitude and arrogant behavior towards clients meant that no acquaintances were willing to hire him. Given his age, reemployment was not easy, and he now juggles several part-time jobs to make ends meet. As for his mother, the stress from the company's issues and the revelation that Nicole's child was not Scott's led her to increasingly lash out at her daughter-in-law, intensifying her mistreatment. Eventually, Scott's sister-in-law fell ill and had to be hospitalized. Despite being cared for by Scott's brother and his wife, his mother maintained her arrogant attitude, stating during the sister-in-law's hospitalization that she didn't care what happened to a daughter-in-law who wasn't family and couldn't have children. This enraged Scott's brother, and he evicted their mother from their home. His mother, surprised by her usually gentle son's actions, only began to apologize after being kicked out, but it was too late. With nowhere to go, she moved into Scott's room, and they now live together in a cramped apartment. His mother, who had never worked before, cannot start working now and lives off Scott's meager income. Despite their changed circumstances, her sense of money remains unchanged, leading to constant arguments as she spends his income. Now that there is no daughter-in-law to mistreat, she has become even more meddling towards Scott. His mother insists, reconcile because it looks bad. A father should be present for his daughter, and you shouldn't separate due to parental issues. Make your wife work full-time and manage the money. Scott is evidently fed up with these demands. Struggling financially, I decided to demand compensation for emotional distress and child support from Scott as if to add insult to injury. Scott seemed quite flustered, apparently not expecting to be asked for compensation. At first he insisted he couldn't pay, but after understanding from a lawyer that his refusal wouldn't hold, he came to negotiate with me directly. With little income and living with his spendthrift mother, he called me almost in tears, asking if there was any way to reduce the amount or make installment payments. However, I plan to leave everything to the lawyer, and given how he has belittled us in the past, I have no intention of listening to any of his requests. Angela also said, we should get everything we're entitled to. It's not right to lose out. Dad shouldn't have it easy either. She's really a sensible daughter. I can hardly believe that Scott, who is barely getting by on part-time jobs, has the ability to pay, but I intend to have him pay the full amount over however many years it takes. I also demanded compensation from Nicole for the stress she caused us, but her father, knowing the whole story, apologized profusely and paid up without a fuss. He will cover it for now, but plans to have Nicole gradually pay him back. Nicole, furious at being nearly disowned, ended up living under her parents' strict supervision at her childhood home with the child, as they didn't want her causing more trouble by getting involved with minors again. It seems she was uncontrollable at first, but now she's settling down and somewhat managing the child care. The college student was demanded to pay child support by Nicole. At first, he dodged the responsibility, becoming unreachable at times, but Nicole's father brought a lawyer to the student's family home. The college student's parents were furious upon learning that their son had engaged in a sugar relationship, impregnated the woman, and then ignored the situation. There was a festival of apologies from Nicole's side, but the college student himself did not seem remorseful. An impatient lawyer suggested that making an enemy of a corporate CEO could jeopardize his career prospects after graduation, making his university degree worthless. Realizing this, he reluctantly agreed to pay child support. Concerned about their social standing, the college student's parents also agreed to be responsible and initially covered the child support, which he would repay from his wages once he started working or from his part-time earnings. The college student, who had previously earned money through sugar dating without working, now works for a low wage and has to dedicate most of his earnings to repayments, working desperately. I have become a full-time employee and my salary has increased. My job is more fulfilling than ever. Although we're not wealthy, I earn enough for the two of us to live comfortably. Angela continues her part-time job at the cafe and helps out sufficiently with household chores, making our lives much easier than when Scott, who was nothing but a burden, was around. Now that we no longer had to deal with my sarcastic mother-in-law, Angela smiles more and seems more relaxed. We want to live happily true to ourselves from now on.